thank you for coming along today, showing your interest in accessibility, especially on a beautiful sunny day like this today. It's to describe you indoors for this event, but I am sure this will be well worth your time. We've got a couple of great speakers today. The first of which is Kevin White, who's here. Now, Kevin is he's actually a UserVision alumni from way back when, and he's gone on to have a great career in accessibility and user experience more widely. I mean, currently he is the accessibility technical lead at the W3C. And prior, he also is advised Socratim, which is the body looking after the technology for councils, local councils especially, advising them on DEI initiatives as well, but also at Scottish Government, where he was the head of digital accessibility. So he's got tremendous experience in really the technical side, but also the advisory side and the governance side for accessibility. And his role now with the W3C is very interesting because he's going to be talking to us about the next iteration of our wonderful WCAG guidelines. It seems like only yesterday that we went from 2.1 to 2.2 and the dust is settled and people got their heads around that. But I think there's some pretty significant changes ahead when 3.0 comes out. So that's going to be Kevin's talk. I hopefully haven't stolen too much of your thunder, Kevin. But at that point, I think I'll just hand over to you. And by the way, Kevin's speaking to us all the way from Austin, Texas, where he's at a fascinating accessibility conference. So it's early in the morning there, and hopefully you're armed with a good cup of coffee and can talk to us from now. Off you go, Kevin.
Yeah, coffee's done, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I can talk about today, or what I said I was talking about today, is WCAG 3. Really, it's just to give a bit of a background as to why it came about, what we're doing, and where we're going. I've also got some resources at the end that'll just give you some things that you can use in the meantime if you're kind of starting your journey with accessibility. There's a number of resources that you might find useful or that you might find useful for your teams. Do you want to go to the next slide then? So, as Chris said, I am the technical accessibility lead, or the accessible technical lead. I never remember which, and I'm not allowed to say my title from Sean. At the Web Accessibility Initiative, I'm the team contact for the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. I'll explain a little bit more about what they do. I've got a background in user-centered design, but also prior to that, I was a developer for a number of years. So I've got a kind of weird mix of technology, people, and policy type stuff. Interestingly, the role in the W3C, the best description I've found for it is a technical diplomat. And if anyone knows me, the idea of me being diplomatic about anything is possibly hilarious. But we'll move on and skip over that one. Do you want to take the next slide, please? So just a quick thing about W3C. Is everybody aware of who the W3C are and what they do? And I see one nod.
They're nodding universally.
Yeah. So W3C, it's a member organization that develops open standards for the web. It's founded in 1994 by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Currently, we've got, that number 410, it varies monthly, but it's about 400 members. But the actual broader community, which includes invited experts, community groups, and people from member organizations is reaching up towards 10,000 people who are working on a wide variety of specifications. We've got hundreds of royalty-free specifications that cover a lot of stuff. Originally, it was things like HTML and CSS, moved into things like linked data, and we've got a security and privacy horizontal space that we're looking at as well, and obviously accessibility, which we've been involved in for getting on 30 years, I think. Cool. Do you want to take the next slide? So I'm going to start with a quick disclaimer, because I'm Kieran. No disrespect or anything, but the statement that Kieran gave for the WCAG 3 was slightly off kilter. WCAG 3 is under development. It's not ready for implementation. It won't be ready for implementation for a long time. Well, long time in terms of web. We have got ongoing conversations and discussions about whether or not there's opportunities to have parts of it made available. That's probably not straightforward, but it's certainly something that we will continue to look at. Whilst we're kind of developing WCAG 3, there's also WCAG 2. It's alive and well. It's being used extensively across the globe. The most recent ones that I know of were an update to the legislation in Australia. There's also there was an update in legislation or regulations within Kenya, and those regulations are looking to get across Africa, which would be really exciting and interesting. All of the work on this is managed and driven by members of the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group through either the main group or through task forces. But that's just to set the scene and to reassure people that they don't need to go rushing off and panicking about WCAG 3 because it's not there yet. And anybody that says they can prepare you for WCAG 3 is not maybe telling the whole truth. Because we are not prepared for it yet because we haven't finished it. Having said that, I will talk through where we're at, and there's also still a lot of opportunities to get involved and to contribute to how the standard develops. Do you want to take up the next slide, please? Okay, so what is WCAG 3? It is the next major version of WCAG. There's another reveal at the bottom. Interestingly, and this is one of the big shifts within WCAG 3, WCAG no longer stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It stands for W3C Accessibility Guidelines. And this is reflective of a shift in how we are thinking about the web in its broadest sense. And it's trying to get across, or trying to move towards more of a, this is a digital standard. We know that there's a wide variety of content that wouldn't be considered the web, but by technologists, but it certainly would be considered the web or the internet or that Google thing by users. And as such, one of the goals with WCAG 3 was to actually look at how do we make something that is more applicable across these different platforms and channels and delivery mechanisms. And that's one of the sort of subtle shifts in that, and there are bigger shifts, is actually changing the name itself. So we still kept the acronym just to confuse people, but we have kind of, as I say, underneath the hood, it's now W3C Accessibility Guidelines. Do you want to take up the next slide? Cool. Okay, so you might say, but I like WCAG too, and trust me, there are many, many people who do. This is all part of the change that we need to happen. I liked WCAG 1. I now recognise that that was not necessarily as comprehensive a guide as we might like, but it was good for its time. WCAG 2 is still very, very effective technology, but we know that it's got its faults, and that's what we're looking to address. And within that, there's a couple of kind of key themes. One is that technology is changing. We know that that's happening, and this isn't necessarily talking about the dreaded four-letter word AI. It's more sort of broad than that. There's new assistive technologies coming out. There's new browser technologies. There's new mobile technologies. There's new ways to interact with content. So technology changes really how you then provision accessibility for people with disabilities. The other thing is we've got is changing needs, or the people with disabilities needs are changing. Now, for some, it's not necessarily the case, but we are expanding our understanding of people with disabilities needs, particularly in the area of cognitive disabilities, and that's lending us more we ensure that those needs are covered, that we're including those in a standard in a way that will encourage people to create content that's usable by them. WCAG, we need to respond to both of these things. And also, we actually know a lot more about how standards are written now. It's the technology of writing standards, the awareness that's developed as well. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of drives this change. Do you want to take up the next slide, please? So how is it changing? Well, as I've suggested, we're going to be making it broader in scope. It's going to be covering more disability groups, but also more technologies. We're also trying to make it a lot more research informed and data driven, which is tricky because a lot of the fundamental needs aren't necessarily researched, but we kind of know that they're necessary. So we are looking for a lot more research information and drive for the actual outcomes that we're covering. It's moving WCAG 2 forward in the same way that 1 to 2 was a big shift. It was trying to become more technology agnostic. It was more broad. It created a different model and a different approach. WCAG 3 has the same sort of direction, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the ways that's going. The last one's kind of one of the biggies in terms of how we're shifting the thinking. It's no longer about technology solutions. It's about user needs, and we're trying to sort of have the user need as the starting point. So effectively, the user need becomes the success criteria, if anyone knows the term, and that then underneath that there are then requirements which allow you to meet that user need. Do you want to take the next slide, please? Okay, but why do we do all this thing? Well, and why do we take that approach? Well, we've done a massive amount of research. And it is, to be fair, one of the things that has slowed down some of the work. It took a long time to run through the research for WCAG 3. It was run under the group Silver, which was a play on AG. And if you click one more link or one more, yeah, there is a research summary which is available, and you can have a look at sort of a lot more in-depth aspects of this, but I will talk through about the sorts of things that were found in the research and which are driving the thinking as we move forward. Do you want to take the next slide, please? Okay, so the first one was there were a lot of usability findings around about WCAG, and this may come as no surprise to many people. The standard itself is difficult to read, and as such, it's difficult to get started in. Do you read top to bottom? You may not. I mean, that was certainly never something I suggested people do. There are better access points, but what we can do is we can start to think about the standard and embed a better content designed experience for users from the get-go, and that's what we're trying to do at this point. We also had, there was also a lot of ambiguity in interpreting success criteria. So there are many success criteria where different accessibility consultants may come to different conclusions for the same content. That's something that's not ideal in a standard, and we certainly want to try and reduce that as much as possible. So a lot of that is around about kind of trying to narrow down the focus of each requirement so that it's much more granular and more straightforward to explain. The last one was, again, something that popped up, and it was around about, excuse me, it was around about persuading others to use WCAG, so getting other people started, the business case for WCAG. There is material for that. I'm not sure yet whether or not we'll be looking to put that in WCAG itself or having that as additional material in the website. But those are the sort of usability findings that we had. Do you want to take the next slide, please? So we also had some difficulties with conformance, and conformance is whether or not a piece of content meets all the provisions within the standard. And a lot of the conformance model, it kind of drove a strict testability approach, which was basically, you're either going to pass or you're going to fail. And for some user needs, that that just doesn't work because it's not straightforward to determine what is pass and what is fail. So for example, a lot of the user needs around about cognitive disability and reading in particular, it's very difficult to kind of go, this reading level passes a certain metric, and therefore that means it's a good thing. It's how are you measuring that? What's right or wrong for these things? And it was never actually clear for some of these, and it meant that there was a lot of stuff missing as a result. As I said earlier, consistent human testable results. We want we want inter-rater reliability, basically. So we want multiple accessibility consultants to come to the same conclusions with the same bit of content. Accessibility supported is an interesting one because it's one that many people don't necessarily pay attention to. And basically, it's the idea that you can have content that meets the standard, but if assistive technologies or the technologies that are available to people with disabilities don't actually recognize or function with that content, then it's not really accessibility supported, so it shouldn't really be able to pass. There are problems with that. So one is, how do we explain it all? But another is, well, what technologies are we actually thinking about when we talk about that? We could be, are we talking just about JAWS, or are we using, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a Japanese screen reader that's much more prevalent in Japan, but we don't test with that regularly. So there's a challenge on, well, okay, so what's the baseline testing for that? And then finally, as I say, in terms of conformance, there's evolving technology, and we kind of need to try and address that as well. So we'll come to the last one in this section. So finally, governance findings. And if you look at the research, this was far less obvious and far less clear. But there were certainly some questions around about the flexibility associated with WCAG 2. How does it apply to different sizes of website? How does it apply in different speeds of website? How does it apply in mobile? It wasn't really flexible to allow sort of these sorts of things. Similarly, scalability. How can you test a site with 1 million pages? It didn't make sense. And finally, governance itself. What's kind of come to that final agreement on what is conforming and what isn't conforming, and how do we support regulators and policymakers to ensure that they're reflecting the important parts of the standard in the regulations that they're creating. Do you want to take the next slide, please? Okay, so there's a pile of things, hopefully that's convincing you that we can change this stuff. Woo! So we can move on and we can get on with the changing. Next slide. So where is it then? If we know all this stuff, why are we not publishing stuff left, right, and center? Where's it got to, and so forth? So if you want to come to the next slide. The challenge that we've got is that standards are developed in a way that's very consensus driven, and we have a wide array of perspectives from a wide array of organizations who are interested in developing the standards. Anyone can comment on our standards, and we get comments across the board, and we have to sort of address those. Excuse me, sorry, I actually developed a cold in Texas. I need to go and grab some water. Can you give me 2 minutes? apologies for that. So yeah, part of the challenge that we've got is just the sheer number of opinions and perspectives that we're trying to reflect in the standard itself. And within the way that most standards are developed, there's the concept, everything's kind of driven by the concept of consensus. So it's an agreement or agreeing to disagree and allowing things to move forward. This all takes, so if you want to take to the next slide and then the one after that, all this stuff takes a lot of time. And we've also got a lot to write. If you go to the next slide, we can kind of cut through some of that. We've roughly got about 200 requirements, slightly more than 200 requirements at proposal stage. And there's 50 that are drafted up to a higher level of maturity. We have actually been able to kind of take some of the large criteria from WCAG 2, so success criteria 131, 412, there's a lot that kind of gets thrown in there, and it makes it difficult to determine whether or not there's a clear failure within that. Those have been kind of teased apart, so a lot of the requirements that are now developing, their parts of them come from those two success criteria. There's quite a lot that come from there. We've also got a draft conformance model, and there's people writing about this left, right, and center on the web. The conformance model is based on there are set foundational requirements within each guideline, and I'll come to some examples. Within the foundational requirements, so the base level of passing or of conformance is meeting all the foundational requirements. There are then supplementary requirements and assertions, and what we're looking at is levels associated with how many supplemental requirements or assertions you additionally meet on top of the foundational requirements. That's not quite bottomed out yet, but the kind of core idea around about having the foundational requirements as the baseline and then using the others to try and encourage people to do more effective accessibility provisions with levels. That's kind of where we're going with it. We just need to work out exactly what that looks like. We have got a draft of the accessibility supported update, and I am going to be very honest with you and say, I still don't understand it. But Alistair, who wrote it, he's quite happy with it. So we're good on that front. We're also looking at assertions. And again, I'll talk about these in a second. And assertions are looking to provide better coverage for disabilities where it's not possible to create a pass-fail test around about it. So assertions and also where we know that the activity is largely beneficial to accessibility if people are doing that. So as I say, I'll come to that in a second. Do you want to skip to the next? So some of the differences. So as I've kind of said a few times, we're trying to make this outcomes focused. So it's not technology focused at the top level. It's very much about outcomes. And I've got an example of that in a second. We've got assertions which are being used to support user needs that can't be supported with a straightforward pass-fail testable criteria. And as I say, we're looking at the conformance model to see how that differs, so that we get away from things like having an all or nothing failure type mentality, and also how do we kind of look at different sizes of websites and so forth. Now that might be in the conformance model, or we might end up having additional material that supports policymakers and regulators in that one. So we'll take the next slide. So after all that talking, here's an example that's in WCAG 3. So this is the guideline around about alternative text, and I'm sure you know the WCAG 2 has all non-text content that's presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose. So that's basically saying Non-text content has a text alternative. It's very much around about the technology. WCAG 3 shifts it or twists it to going, users have equivalent alternatives for images. So that outcome is different from the all non-text content. It's broader. We can apply it in multiple different contexts without changing it, without bending over backwards to try and make it work. And that's the guideline. So all of the guidelines that we've got are these outcome statements that are based in the user need and are trying to steer clear of stating the technology that would be required to implement that user need. Indeed, one of the things that we're trying to get to, and I'll come to this I think next, one of the things that we're trying to get to is though that user need could be met in multiple different ways. So if you go to the next slide. So within the user need, users have equivalent alternatives for images. There are a number of requirements. So if it's a decorative image is programmatically hidden. If there's the concept that it needs equivalent text alternative is available to convey the content, and then also the image needs to be programmatically determinable. So we need to be able to the technology needs to be able to go, yeah, that's an image. I know what that is. Now, if you think about this in the context of the modern web browser, and particularly in the context of AI and what AI can potentially do, decorative images could potentially be identified by AI within your browser and automatically marked as hidden. And the content writer need not do anything. That if the technology is there, then that requirement is met pretty much for everybody because there is a broad uptake of the technology, which means it's built into the browser. And this is what one of the big things that we're trying to do. It's write it in such a way that there are different pathways to solving the problem. It's not as straightforward as just saying the content writer, the developer, the designer needs to fixing everything. We've got a little bit of that happened already with WCAG 2. So success criteria 4.1.1 basically got removed from WCAG 2.2. And the reason was because browsers are pretty much doing a good job of dealing with badly formed content. So the developers don't need to worry about it. The browsers are doing it. So we don't need that as a requirement. Ideally, we wouldn't have had to remove it. It would have just been automatically met, but potato, potato. Similarly, things like keyboard focus styling. So we do have requirements associated with keyboard focus styling. Those again could be met in different ways. So the browsers are pretty close to pretty much doing that out of the box. And if that's the case, then it really just a designer or a developer doing something daft would result in a failure of that particular requirement. So this is kind of one of the things that's underneath this. Do you want to take to the next slide? So assertions, these are a kind of thing within standards that really they are just attributable and documented statements regarding practices that will improve accessibility. So we do training, we do usability testing, and these supplement the requirements. So these are additional things that would demonstrate your meeting a guideline. And what we're trying to do with those is outline what is good practice and give organizations a way to demonstrate progress. So they might not be fixing everything, but they might be doing user testing. That's a good thing. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with those. Do you want to go to the next slide? I'll give you an example of one. So this is just a simple example within the users have equivalent alternatives for images. An assertion would be, I have a style guide and text alternatives follow that organizational style guide. And that's all you need to do as an organization. You've asserted what you are doing, the practice that you're taking, and that's enough to kind of go tick, yeah, you're fine on that one. Now, obviously, you could argue, well, companies will just assert all manner of things, but if they assert something and it's demonstrably wrong, then you can say, well, actually, you're not conforming, so bad. And that's similar to things like VPATs. When you challenge VPATs and you go, you're making these claims, but actually they're not true. So So they're I think they're broadly seen as useful things. They will actually allow us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can, what user needs we can support. Okay. We'll go on to the last one, which is just conformance. So if you want to take the next slide. So WCAG 2, the conformance just references websites, and you need to pass all the success criteria. If you don't pass the success criteria, you're not conforming. WCAG 3, as I said, all content that's in scope, and that's a particular phrase that needs to be bottomed out, but all content that's in scope must meet the foundational requirements. If you do that, you're conforming. And then higher levels of conformance are achieved. This is similar to level A, level AA, level AAA, but it's slightly different because you don't need to do all of the supplemental requirements or the assertions in order to push yourself up to a different level. You could do a percentage of them and you would get up from bronze to silver, silver to gold, whatever. Okay, do you want to move on to the next thing? So this is just a quick outline of the sorts of work that we're up to this year. We've got another 2. So WCAG 3 has been published. We've got a draft that's there. There's a link to the draft later in the document. I will mention that one. We've got 2 more updates that we're going to do this year. The next one, which is probably June time, what we're going to try and do is remove all the requirements where we know there's not enough research to support it at the moment. So we're going to take that out just to kind of refine and have a look at, okay, this is the stuff that we know is evidenced, that we know we could go to a live standard with. We're also taking 2 requirements and we are working them up to a high level of maturity. So we're looking to write all the content that supports that. So in sort of similar to WCAG 2, we've got equivalents of understanding documents and techniques in WCAG 3. They're not called that, but they're there. So it's writing all those and getting that to a high level. The reason we want to do that is because then we can kind of go, well, it took us this long to do those. Therefore, given we've got 80 requirements, we know that it's going to take us roughly this long. So it's a planning. We need to do that for planning. We need to have a look at conformance decisions. We still need to bottom that out. There's a few things around about levels, points, whether or not there are modules associated with specific industries. And we also need to kind of cover a couple of definitions. So one of the definitions is associated with, in WCAG 2, you talk about web pages and processes, but how does that apply to a mobile? So we need to kind of think about the language that we're using and the definitions in order to be able to go, this is the scope of the conformance claim, and it can't be web page because we know that there are other things that we want this to apply to. And finally, we're also doing a pile of work still on WCAG 2. There's about 500 issues in the backlog. We slowly chip away at them and improve things with that. Okay, do you want to take the next slide? So, given all this, and it's going to take a while, we haven't got the full plan yet, but 3 years is one of the currently touted numbers for finalizing requirements. That's not official by any stretch of the imagination. We've not kind of worked that one out, but that's what it's kind of looking at. That also doesn't necessarily take that to regulators. That's just we get to the point where we've published it, and then there's obviously multiple years beyond that where regulators, policymakers need to pick up the materials. But there's still plenty of stuff that you can do just now, either on WCAG 3 or just in learning more about accessibility. So if you want to take up the next slide. So the first thing you can do is actually feedback on WCAG 3. We publish this regularly. We've got some key questions in there that we are very keen for anyone within the community with a bit of a thought about this to have a look at that and contribute some thoughts. WCAG 3 is not as daunting a read as WCAG 2. It's slightly less technical language, and if you have a look at it, avoid the kind of first sections and just go kind of straight into the actual requirements and the guidelines. it's kind of, again, the writing, we've tried to do this in terms of much more user sort of centered type stuff and make it more straightforward to read. But have a read of it. You can file an issue on GitHub. There are loads of discussions on GitHub where we're trying to bottom out certain topics, a lot of the stuff that I've spoken about. And you can also email directly to the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. Do you want to take the next one? So other than that, I mean, this is a shameless plug, to be fair. In writing the standard, WCAG 3 is created by members of the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. That includes W3C member organizations, and any organization can pay to become a member organization, and then you can participate in any group. So if you are very interested in this and your company is interested in accessibility and they have a few pounds hiding down the back of the sofa, they may be interested in becoming members, or you may already be a member organization, in which case you can join the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. We also have invited experts, and these are individuals who are not employed by members, but they contribute their expertise and time. So you can apply to be an invited expert if you're bringing particular skills and capabilities to the group, then that can be quite useful. There's a link there to the membership. As I say, shameless plug. Let's move on. The last few slides, I just wanted to focus on a couple of resources that you may or may not know about. If you do know about them, great. You can kind of you can high five everybody that you know and say, this is great, we know all this stuff anyway, fab. One of the things that we've got within the way content is a section that it's basically accessibility. It's about people. And this is a kind of key part for us at W3C. It's not just, the technical standard is a tool that improves the lives of people with disabilities. And we've got so the web accessibility perspectives, there's a series of videos that kind of explore the impact and benefits that apply for everybody of accessibility accommodations. There's a resource called How People with Disabilities Use the Web, which is a series of, for want of a better word, personas and user stories that talk about the good things, bad things that help with disabilities. So those can be used as part of design sprints and building understanding and so forth. Do you want to go to the next slide? There's also there's a series of tips for getting started, and these cover writing, designing, developing. For each of those, there's about 10 tips, which we kept very simple. They're all illustrated. There's short descriptions of what they are and why, and then linking through to more involved discussions and involved resources around about those topics. They're very useful because they kind of narrow down what you might be interested in, and they're very targeted towards particular roles within design teams. Do you want to go to the next one? This is one where actually, if anybody is interested, I would love feedback on. This is a draft that we created about a year and a half ago, and we've not had the chance to thoroughly test it. So there's still the old easy checks, and then this is the new easy checks that we've done. What it does is it provides bookmarklets. So these are little bits of JavaScript that you drag into your bookmarks bar, and then when you go to a website, you can click on that bookmark, and it will test something, whether that's, it will show you the alternative text, it will show you the title of the document, whatever. There's a series of about 14 or 15 of them, I can't remember exactly. Those are very useful just if you want to get a rough idea of what's going on. I also use it, there's an excellent headings one in there, which is really handy because I click on that and then it gives me all the headings at the side, and I can click on those and go to that section of the document. I find that very useful, not only for sort of checking the accessibility, but also just for navigating the page. Cool. And I think, oh yeah, last slide on this one. We have also got a Digital Accessibility Foundations course. This is a free online course. It's for technical and non-technical learners. You can focus on particular topics, so you can kind of deep dive into something that's more of use to you. It is free, but you can pay for an optional certificate. And it's a really, really good course. I would say that, Obbs. But it is actually, we've got a lot of really positive feedback around about this, and it's well received. We are also looking to update these courses in the next few months. We've currently got one digital foundations course. We're looking at splitting that out into two. One which is for anybody, just to get a good understanding of accessibility and digital inclusion, and then the other one which is much more focused on WCAG. We may also be looking at doing an evaluators course, which would be very much targeted towards people looking to develop their skills in evaluating accessibility. So those courses are available. Use them, they're great. And then I think that's me done. And I'm open for any questions or suggestions, either now or drop me an email. Quite happy to talk with people. But is there any questions from the rooms?
Visit Scotland. So there was a couple of things that struck out to me there. I think the W3C standards and the W3C accessibility guidelines, I don't know that the name change is that much of a problem, because I think a lot of users refer to them in that way, because that seems really familiar to me anyway. So I don't know that it's like a massive jump. So I think it's that probably going to be received okay. I do wonder about the ambiguity or having a broader solutions. Are you saying like more flexibility around being prescriptive about what the solutions for some of the checkpoints are, on the basis that for a lot of SMEs or public funded organisations where you've got non-experts maybe trying to check that things are accessible, they're really looking for specific guidelines. So I wonder whether they're going to have challenges in applying appropriate solutions. So, for example, in the example you gave, where you kind of state that, you know, you should provide text for non-text alternatives for images, it's much broader, so it could be interpreted in many ways. And I just wonder what the outcomes of that might be. And also, I wonder the WCAG 3, will it have the quick reference checklist like the WCAG 2, because that's really helpful, and will that stuff be incorporated into the accessibility check tool?
Right. So 4 questions there. First, W3C accessibility guidelines. Yeah, I agree. Most people aren't probably going to bother about that. They're probably not going to see it. The amount of people that tell me, "Oh yes, we're WCAG compliant," you're going, "What? Okay, fine, whatever." People don't necessarily worry about that. It's more of a, weirdly, it's more of an internal thing, because there's a question of, if we are the World Wide Web consortia, what are we doing providing standards for other digital components? That's part of the problem. Second question was, can't remember. What was your second question? Oh, are people going to have problems just demonstrating that they meet the requirements if there are ways to meet? Because if the browser does it, then what will happen is, when you look at assessing whether or not that requirement is met, the information that's available on their site will pretty much be, the browser does this, don't worry about it, move along please. And it will outline, as long as you're using these browsers, you're going to be grand. So that's kind of what we're thinking about with that one. And there are other ways that you can kind of do that. So authoring tools in particular, authoring tools and browsers, those are probably the 2 areas where, if those address accessibility problems, then content editors, SMEs, they don't need to worry about it, because it's just done. And that's kind of the goal with that one. Next question was, what was the next question?
People applying maybe appropriate solutions when the criteria become broader and less prescriptive, I think.
Yeah, that was that one. No, it was quick ref. Yes, quick ref is going to be there. We're not quite sure what it looks like. We're not sure who's going to build it, but we are certainly going to, it's certainly going to be there. And then the last one was another one related to that. Oh yeah, and is it going to be reflected in the evaluation methodology and reporting tool? Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Do you have a question?
My question was about the problems that you listed. You said that one of the problems that you identify is ambiguity in interpreting the success criteria. The example that you gave about the language change was very helpful. Do you also have an example for interpreting the success criteria?
So as in terms of inter-rater reliability and kind of multiple consultants coming up with different answers to the same problem. Yeah, I mean, that kind of falls apart in a couple of areas. So things like, well, 131 info and relationships and 412 states, they tend to be interpreted in multiple different ways because there's a lot within there. And some people might go, okay, a simple example is things like some people might go, well, you've got more than one H1 on a page, that's a failure. And somebody else might go, no, there's enough H1s, you're fine. It doesn't make any difference. And in actual fact, there's actually not much ambiguity in that because there's nothing that says you should only have one H1. But anyway, it's stuff like that where there are kind of slight differences in terms of how people are looking at things, and they are coming to different conclusions and then saying, one person says, yeah, this passes, another person says that, yeah, this fails. That shouldn't be the case. We should have limited scope for that to happen.
Okay. Some more questions, either from here or I believe. Okay. Sorry, there you go.
Hi, hi Kevin. I think the answer to this one is no, which is good. I've not read 3 draft, right? But is there anything that you're aware of as an organisation? We're obviously all trying to strive to hit 2.2 guidelines. Is there anything in 3 that contradicts what is in 2.2?
There will be. It's not going to be backwards compatible.
Okay.
So it's going to be a change. Now, having said that, if you meet 2.2, you won't meet 3. But if you meet 3, you'll probably meet 2.2, if that makes sense. But there's no guarantee that that's the case. Because of the approach that we're taking, there is the possibility that it won't be backwards compatible.
So it might require some updating, probably, I would imagine, a new set of standards.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, the timelines are I mean, we're still writing it. 3 years is our current guesstimate. As I say, we're in the middle of planning the next charter period. And even when we finished, it still needs to then be adopted by regulators and policy makers across different legislators. So it's not something that you're going to be worrying about next week or even next year.
Cool, thanks.
Okay. Any more
And
questions?
sorry, last one just on that. And probably if you are already on a solid journey for meeting WCAG 2.2, or you already meet WCAG 2.2, it's probably not going to be a massive amount of work to kind of move towards WCAG 3. It's not like these solutions get completely thrown out or anything like that. There's going to be more in WCAG 3, and there might be some bits where it's just not there.
That would probably just feed into continuous improvement work.
Yep.
Okay. Any more questions from here, or I can't see them thanks to the glass, but anyone in the room next door, if you have any questions from the observation room, just pop through into here and let us know. In the meantime, I guess my question would be, sometimes people are critical of the WCAG guidelines in general, in that, it shouldn't be a tick box exercise. And I think most people will agree with that. You don't want it to be that. You want it to be inspiring, to be making changes. How do you think this compares in its tick boxiness compared to WCAG 2? I just made up a word. Very inaccessible.
Yeah, no, well done. Taking my W3C hat off for a little bit, my personal perspective on this one is, I think if you look at any list of things, you can turn it into a checkbox exercise if you really want. So there will be organizations guaranteed that kind of look at this and just go, oh, there's a list of things. We just need to do that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. What's the minimum viable accessibility that we need to meet? I can't see how that will not happen just because of the nature of standards and how they work. Is that problematic? I don't think so, because the way that we're actually pitching this is that the baseline, so the foundational requirements that are in WCAG 3 are likely to be pitched at a level higher than level AA. So they're going to be level AA plus a little bit more. So even if someone just does a checkbox on all the foundational requirements, they're still doing more than what they're probably doing now. So.
Okay, good. And just on that AA points the other day, you just mentioned it in passing, but it sounds like there isn't going to be over AA, AAA like there is now. Right? You've defined foundational and the other two. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's foundational, supplemental, and assertions. Yeah. And then the foundationals are you have to meet all the foundationals in order to be considered conformant, and then the supplementals and assertions, it's just like, okay, if you meet 50% of them, well, actually, I'm throwing this out. This isn't how we've done it yet. If you meet 50% of them, you're silver. If you meet 20% of them, you don't get to that point. So it's the idea is that people can kind of go, well, actually, we can do all of these things, but these ones are really, really hard. That's fine. You're still getting credit, if you like, and being able to demonstrate the work that you're doing is good, just because you're working in that particular set of supplemental or assertions.
Great. Okay.
So,
thanks.
Do you mind if I just ask a quick question as well? So I've been to a lot of kind of talks and listened to other people in the field mention about how WCAG AA doesn't really cater for people with like cognitive disabilities and things like that. Is that going to be a big focus of kind of WCAG 3, or is there, and how is that going to look?
So there's two things with this. So first off, to answer your actual question, yes, there's going to be a lot more in terms of cognitive. This is why we're looking at assertions. It allows us to put in things that are non-testable and make non-testable things testable by just saying, we did this thing. And we know that those things bring broader benefits. So for example, the example I gave there was around about alternative text, but another example is we've got plain text guidance, and we assess every bit of content as it goes live. That's going to have a benefit for people with reading disabilities. We know that. We can't test it because plain text is a really tricky one to assess for lots and lots of different reasons. It's also a really tricky one to internationalize, but we can do it. The other one, your non-question, your assertion, was that people are saying WCAG 2 doesn't have much provision, or doesn't have provision for people with cognitive disabilities. It actually does. There's about a dozen success criteria that will have an impact on the user experience for people with cognitive disabilities. There's a broad range of cognitive disabilities, so it's difficult to pin down exactly who benefits from it, but we know that there are success criteria related to that. So it's not as straightforward just to say WCAG 2 doesn't do cognitive. It does. It could do more, but in order for it to do more, we need to kind of shift away from this straightforward testable success criteria type approach.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Okay, well, with one eye on the time, I'll ask again, is there any further questions for anyone? I'm sure Kevin's open to any questions to follow up when they inevitably pop in here. You walk out the door from here today. So feel free to do that. And thank you all for attending. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us from all the way from Texas. The start of your day.
Pleasure.
All right. And I hope you have a great rest of your day at a busy day at the conference. I hope it's going well.
Thank you very much for the invite. It's been great.
Excellent. Well, we really enjoyed it. Thanks very much, Kevin, again. I'll be in touch.
Take care all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.